Okay, so we are on assignment 8 now to make a text solution that goes with our spot illustration. So we start with sketching again. Even though there are lots of good type tools in Illustrator that we'll be playing with, the most important thing is to understand what shape you want the type to take along with your spot illustration. And so this is, and I'm keeping it pretty simple. I just want to put a better world underneath in kind of this cloudy way. Right. So I am going to use that, and I can clean it up a little bit. This was just, using the computer's camera. If I adjust color, I can brighten it up. I can sharpen it. I can take out all that noise. And I might use these, but I'm thinking I'm not too worried about these distracting letters on the outside. I'm more worried about this, a better world underneath. Nice generic achievement badge kind of phrase. Okay, so now, looking at this, keeping it open in preview and off to the corner, I am going to research some typefaces. And I already have, and I've downloaded them here, but I haven't put them into the computer yet. So I'm going to show you how to research typefaces. So how would you describe the typeface that you sketched with? That was your first thought. So these are blocky. You would call these a modern type. They have no serifs. They have nothing decorative about them. You might call them bubbly letters because they're kind of curving or more animated. And they're also, and this is a nice tip for anyone going into design, they're all capitals. What's nice about using all capitals, not that you have to, but capitals naturally space themselves. Whereas lowercase, you have to do a lot more of what's called kerning, which is adapting the spaces in between the letters to look better. Now, typefaces are not only individual vector files for every letter of our alphabet, they are also built-in spaces around those letters. And so those are all the kind of things we're going to modify, even if we find a typeface that gets us pretty close to what we have in mind. And then we are going to modify that typeface by outlining it as our own vector. And by outlining it as our own vector, we can do anything we want to. So the site that I have on the assignment sheet that's very useful and used by a lot of designers is dafont.com, dafont.com. And all of these, they're like public domain typefaces. These are just ones added probably in the last few hours because this gets updated all the time. And at any time, a designer can take their work off of this site as well. So sometimes they'll share them for a short time just to kind of get them known, and then they'll go on to sell them on their own sites. Or sometimes they're just trying to get support. So there's some beautiful examples. We see some script fonts here that were recently added, but that's not what I'm looking for, right? So it can help to look under basic. You can type in exactly what you're looking for. Like I could look up blocky and see if anything is like that. And that's not what I meant, right? So I tend to go to the general themes first. And I want sans serif, basic. And the bold font, that's pretty close. If I like it, I'll right click and I'll say open link in new tab. Ooh, Cocoa Goose is nice. And there are 62 pages of these, right? So I'll usually skip to the middle. Ah, this is beautiful. Now I'm not looking for anything too crazy. If you're looking for something really specific, you'll probably find it here, but you might have to look a little harder. And I want everyone to research and download at least 3 different typefaces that they think might be helpful. Okay, I already have more than that. So the bold font, so the reason I right click and open it in a new window is because I can do this. I can type with all capitals exactly the phrase I want and see what it would look like in this font. or in this typeface. And then I think, can I modify that to be what I want? Like, yeah, the T's are pretty weak. The R is a little fussy. I like how basic the O is. It could be made to work. But let's look at some of the others. So I'm going to take my wording, try it here. What I like is this is slightly rounded at the edges, which works better with my kind of overall theme. See that difference? We're talking about subtlety here. So this one's a better bet so far. Otherwise, it's almost identical. Let's look at the O. Yeah. Okay, let's look at this one. I have high hopes for this one. And then real font designers will often try to advertise it. They'll show some of the extra kind of coloring features that you can add to it. And they'll even, this is very generous of them, honestly, most fonts on DaFont are just the alphabet, and sometimes just uppercase the alphabet, because that's the most common use of them. But if they include numbers and symbols and lowercase, I mean, this even is giving foreign language symbols, then this is a very complete font set. And this is one that you might not only use for this project, you might use as one of your kind of standards in your designs. You know, it might be a font you start to think with, or a typeface you start to design with. So I like that, just because it's a little funkier. It has that slightly hand-drawn feel, and I can modify that, I think, without as much work. I like how the T's are strong next to the others, even though the kerning between them is a little, will have to be worked with. And then last one. Yeah, that just looks too movie postery. It's too fussy at the bites, and it doesn't leave enough space. So I'm going with this one. So I'm going to download it. So this is what happens when you download. And these are different fonts than I found the first time, or different typefaces. I go to Downloads. You open your Downloads folder in your Finder so you can see it, and you'll see it as a zip file. It will be the most recently thing downloaded, so I'll usually organize my downloads viewing by date added, right? Because a lot of junk gets downloaded. So then you just double click it to unzip the file, open up the folder, and you want either an OTF file or a TTF file. This happens to have both. They both work. You double click on it and you say install font. And that will install it into what Apple computers call their font book. And there it is. But you need to know the name of it. So this is called Digitalt. And so when I look in Illustrator now, and I scroll through the different typefaces that are default to Illustrator, this will now be one of them. These are some of the others. This is a new computer, but I've already installed Pokemon fonts, a Ketchup font, an Oxygen font, a Back to Black font, and this will grow. And the way designers, I don't know, out-machismo each other is just how many fonts have you collected. So you start collecting a lot. It's nice that there's not too many because it will be easy to find, but you need to know the name of it. So I'll usually minimize my font book so I can be reminded of what the name of it is. And sometimes I'll do that with my downloads folder too. Now this, like I said, this designer was very thoughtful. They also give you a visual PDF, which is kind of showing you what's called a spec sheet. So this font is really designed for multiple size uses, different kernings, different effects. And that's basically what I'm going to be using it for. But it is not, a one and done solution. This is just where I start. And then if you want to save it for later, you can always save the folder, because it doesn't really do you any good in downloads, into your assignment folder. Once you've installed it in the font book, it's available in all your programs, including Microsoft Word and PowerPoint. But that's computer specific. So before I send it to a printer or send it to another computer, I will need to outline those fonts as standalone vector shapes. because that font, that typeface, I keep saying font, that typeface isn't loaded on every computer, only the ones that add it in. Just like if you embed a movie file or an MP3 music file into a PowerPoint, unless you also give it the MP3 or the movie file, it won't play on that computer. All right, so now what do we do? Well, now we are going to open up our sketch in Illustrator, much like we did for digital inking. But this is a little different. And the reason I'm opening my sketch is because that's where I have the spacing for the type. And then I'm basically going to type out a better world in at least 3 different typefaces, just to make sure that it is what I want. So I actually need to install these other 2 that I found. One's called Insanaboo. It's more rounded. This one had an air to it. So I don't even know if that will install, but we will see. Yep, or Insana Burger. Very nice, with cheese. So that's another option I have. And then what's the third? These are the ones I found at the end of last class. And I can do an Insana Burger regular, in case I don't want cheese. And I've never heard of viruses being put into fonts or typefaces, but I'm sure people can find a way. So whenever you're downloading files, do it at your own risk, especially when you're clicking and installing. But OTF and TTF files are incredibly basic file types. So as long as you're not opening things you don't understand. And the font does a pretty good job with its user base. So it's not like you're downloading from some unknown website. And notice it doesn't ask for any administrative permissions to download and install typefaces. And that's intentional. It's at a kind of a higher level of the computer's operating system. It doesn't go as deep as what you would need because they are basic programs. All right, so here's our sketch. What am I going to do with my sketch? I'm going to double click on the layer and dim it to 50% so I can see black clearly on top of it. Doesn't matter what size it is because this is Illustrator. Now I'm going to lock that layer, make a new layer on top, and I am going to, for the first time in either Photoshop or Illustrator in this class, I'm going to use the type tool. Looks like a T. And I'm just going to click, not make a box, just click at the top. Then I'm going to type my text. In my case, all caps, a better world. And it's boring looking. It's Myriad Pro, it's 12 point. So I'm going to increase that, make it roughly the size I want. Going to center it using this paragraph option. I can use the move tool, the large selection tool, center it in the middle. And then at any time I can use the text tool and treat it like a Word document, edit it, work with the spacing, but most importantly, choose a new set of typeface characters. So the first I want is digitalt. I like that one. But maybe it's not perfect yet. So what if I need to change the spacing in between each letter? Well, a really labor-intensive way to do it is to add a space between each letter and then change the size of each space. But a better way to do it is to simply highlight the individual words let me get this to work. And then hold down Option and use your arrow keys. This is called kerning. Kerning is for the space between letters. Leading is for the space between lines of type. So kerning is vertical